Lovechild grew up in the dim corners of a world that sparkled for everyone else. Born to a mother who fought through every day as a working woman, he'd come to know struggle as intimately as family. Her face was worn but proud, a constant reminder of the battles she fought for him and his siblings. But it was with him, her love child, that she reserved a softness, a grace that none of the others seemed to receive. She would tell him that he was special, destined for something greater, something she herself might never know. Yet, there was another part of him, another legacy left by the man whose face Lovechild only knew from whispered stories and embellished tales. His father was said to be a man of charm, a devil's tongue wrapped in a thick country drawl, a hustler who could sell ice to Eskimos and dreams to the dreamless. Off Dawson's Strip, in the heart of Hanover County, people still murmured about him, the country slick-talking Negro who had left marks as deep as scars. This was the man who'd taken his mother's innocence, who had promised her forever in one night and vanished before dawn. Lovechild grew up in the shadow of his father's myth, the stories swirling around him like folklore, his dad's rumored ability to talk his way out of anything, his knack for slipping through danger like a knife through silk. There were tales of how he'd tangled with some of the slickest players, even outwitting mafia men from up north who thought they knew every trick in the book. But it was Dawson's Strip that held his legend. It was here that his father had made his name, a place where cash and favors were traded under the low hum of dim neon lights and the smell of cheap liquor mixed with cigarettes. As Lovechild grew, he felt a pull towards that life, an itch for the thrill, the slyness, the edge that came from his father's blood running through his veins. But his mother's voice was always there, her presence steadying him, whispering of something more. She was the one who'd looked past her own hurt, who'd spent late nights nursing his dreams, sheltering him from the harsher truths of their world. She taught him to be proud but not too proud, to be cunning but not cruel, a delicate balancing act he had yet to perfect. Life on Dawson's Strip called to him in ways he couldn't ignore, though. He began to make his own name among the people who'd known his father, seeking out stories that held slivers of the man he'd never meet. Every tale was like a piece of a jigsaw puzzle, a glimpse into the charisma that could charm, the wit that could slice, and the weaknesses his father never allowed anyone to see. He began to see both the allure and the pitfalls of the hustle. He knew that for every story of his father's triumphs, there were darker tales that went untold, shadows hidden from the light. So Lovechild walked a line, one foot in the shadow of his father's legacy, the other in the warmth of his mother's hope. He found himself torn between embracing the dangerous legacy his father left behind or becoming the man his mother always believed he could be. He was a product of both worlds, yet fully belonging to neither, a child of love, but also a child of survival, of grit, and of quiet, resilient hope. As he took his first steps into adulthood, Lovechild knew that he'd have to choose what parts of his past to hold on to and which to leave behind. He would forge his own legend, one built on more than shadows and stories. And maybe, just maybe, he'd find a way to become both his mother's greatest hope and his father's untamed legacy. A child who knew love as fiercely as he knew the street's brutal honesty. Dawson's Strip was a place where dreams and desperation intertwined beneath a thin veil of dusty, flickering streetlights. In the evening haze, Lovechild's house stood out in its own quiet way. It was one of 3 barely livable homes on the Strip, worn down by years of harsh winters and relentless summers, yet still holding on, like a fighter, bruised but undefeated. The house was a relic, with chipping paint and sagging porch steps that creaked with every shift in the wind. But it was home, a place that clung to him as much as he clung to it. The rest of the Strip was a smattering of crumbling shacks, their broken windows and peeling walls making them seem like the last gasps of a forgotten era. These shacks, all huddled together in disrepair, bore the scars of time and neglect. They lined the narrow road like ghosts, with rusted metal and cracked wood whispering stories of a once thriving stretch that had long since lost its soul. Small, dimly lit country stores sat at each corner, serving up essentials to the locals, their shelves stocked with canned goods, cheap liquor, and cigarettes. These were places where patrons came and went, lingering in shadows, exchanging glances that held too many secrets. Behind the houses lay a fenced-in field that was no less desolate, barren and littered with garbage. It was a place few dared to go unless they had business there. Weeds and broken glass lined the dirt path that wound its way through the yard, weaving past worn-out tires and splintered boards. It was here that the working women, the night angels, as Lovechild's mother called them, gathered under the cover of darkness. These were women with hard eyes and soft laughter, women who had seen too much and survived more. They'd come to this field at the end of their night, kicking off their heels, leaning against rusted metal fences, and sharing stories over cigarettes that glowed faintly in the dim light. It was a sacred space for them, a place where they could speak openly, trading secrets of the street and consoling each other through the burdens they carried alone. Lovechild, growing up among these sights and sounds, was no stranger to the unspoken rhythms of Dawson Strip. He'd often catch snippets of their conversations as he lay in his bed at night, the words drifting through his open window like smoke. Tales of survival, warnings for the new girls, and secrets that weren't meant for his ears. They'd speak in low tones, their voices a strange lullaby that lulled him to sleep, both comforting and cautionary. This field, as grim as it appeared, was a gathering ground, a place of unspoken sisterhood. And though Lovechild was young, he understood the grit and resilience of these women. He knew them by their faces, by the way they softened when they saw him, and sometimes pressed coins into his hand with a wink. He knew that they, like his mother, carried the weight of a hard life. They'd seen what happened when the world forgot about people, when it let places like Dawson Strip fall apart. In the nights, when the strip went quiet and the last patron staggered home, the field returned to silence. The world would be still, leaving only the soft rustling of the wind through the weeds, as if the field itself were taking a deep breath after the night's trials. And in this quiet Lovechild found a strange comfort. This was his world, as broken and raw as it was resilient. In the backdrop of abandoned shacks and whispered secrets, he grew to understand both survival and solitude. By day, Lovechild's house was quiet, a place of resilience hidden behind weathered walls, an unassuming home that blended into the shadows of Dawson Strip. But when the sun dipped below the horizon, the house transformed, its doors opening to the night like a second life. Under the moonlight, Lovechild's house became the Strip's best-kept secret. A liquor house, a gathering ground for men looking to escape the burdens of their lives and indulge in cheap whiskey, laughter, and fleeting moments of camaraderie. The men would arrive slowly at first, glancing over their shoulders as they slipped inside. Some were regulars, familiar faces from the Strip, while others were strangers passing through, drawn in by word of mouth and the scent of strong drink. Lovechild would hear the hum of voices drifting through the walls, the clink of bottles against glass, and bursts of laughter mingled with muttered conversations. The air was thick with smoke and secrets, and as the night deepened, so did the revelry, each man finding his place among the worn-out chairs and the tables scarred with cigarette burns. But there was an unspoken rule on Dawson Strip, one that every man was expected to understand. The Strip was the women's domain during the day, a place where they moved freely, gathering on the stoops, laughing with each other, and claiming the space as their own. It was the only time they had that was free from scrutiny, a precious few hours when they could be themselves without the eyes of men watching. And anyone who forgot this rule would be reminded of it swiftly. One summer afternoon, as the sun cast long shadows across the Strip, a man with too much confidence and too little sense decided to test this rule. He was a stranger, someone new to Dawson Strip, a man who thought he could linger on Lovechild's porch as if it were his own. He slouched against the railing, squinting in the bright light, and called out to the women passing by, his voice slurred with drink. They ignored him at first, exchanging glances and shaking their heads, hoping he'd take the hint and move along. But he didn't. Instead, he reached out, grabbing the arm of one woman who passed by, his fingers lingering too long, his smile too bold. In a heartbeat, the quiet of the afternoon shattered. The woman pulled her arm back, eyes blazing with anger, and within moments, 2 others joined her, circling the man like lions ready to defend their territory. They didn't need words, their actions spoke for them. He tried to laugh it off, but his smile faded as they advanced. Before he knew it, one of them had grabbed him by the collar, her knuckles white as she dragged him down the porch steps. He stammered, trying to apologize, but it was too late. The 3 women took turns, their fists and heels striking with a fury that had been building for years, a reminder to him and anyone else who dared to forget that Dawson's Strip was their ground first and foremost. By the time they were done, he was sprawled in the dirt, his face bruised and his pride shattered. He scrambled to his feet, muttering curses under his breath, but he didn't dare look back as he stumbled off into the distance, leaving behind the lesson of the day. After that, word spread quickly. Men talked in hushed tones about the stranger who dared to break the rules, about how he'd thought he could walk onto Dawson's Strip and take liberties he hadn't earned. But even as the tale was passed from mouth to mouth, it took on a life of its own, a warning woven into the very fabric of the Strip. Respect the women, keep to your place, and understand that while Dawson's Strip may welcome you after dark, it belongs to the women by day. And Love Child, young as he was, understood that this was more than just a rule. It was a code, a truth that defined his home and the people who lived there. From then on, the men who came to Love Child's house after dark knew to wait until the sun had set, to hold their desires and their vices until the night gave them permission. And in this way, Dawson's Strip maintained its delicate balance, an uneasy truce held together by the memories of bruises and whispered threats, a strip where respect was as valuable as survival. As Love Child grew older, he transformed from the boy who listened in the shadows to a young man with a presence that commanded respect on Dawson's Strip. His bond with the women around him deepened, forged by years of watching them fight for every inch of dignity and survival. He had learned early the strength in their laughter, the pain behind their silence, and the stories they trusted only to each other. And over time, he became their protector, an unspoken guardian of Dawson's Strip. Love Child had a quiet authority about him. He wasn't one for grand gestures or loud declarations. Instead, he kept watch, his sharp gaze tracking anyone who dared to step out of line. Men from all over would still drift in and out of Dawson, drawn by the allure of a night on the Strip. But they knew the rules, and they knew that if they crossed them, they'd have to answer to Love Child. His reputation became a shield for the women. They felt a little safer, knowing he was there. It was during one humid July evening, in the haze of a heavy sunset, that she showed up. Her name was Nugget, and she stood out from the moment she set foot on Dawson's Strip. She was from the beach, some 45 minutes away, where the air was salty and the rhythm of life felt looser. Nugget had a confident swagger, a mix of toughness and grace that was rare, even on Dawson. Her skin was bronzed by the sun, and her eyes held a brightness that was both alluring and guarded. Nugget came with her own stories, her own battles. She'd grown up fast, the beachside life hardening her edges while giving her a wild independence. Dawson's Strip was new to her, and in some ways it wasn't all that different from the world she'd left behind. Except here, everything was sharper, grittier. She could feel the rawness of it, the unfiltered energy that crackled in the air. And yet, she walked as if she belonged, her steps sure, her eyes meeting each gaze with defiance. Love Child noticed her the moment she arrived, a spark of curiosity flickering in his usual calm demeanor. She wasn't like the others. There was a resilience in her, a daring streak that intrigued him. He watched her navigate the Strip, her confidence and sharp wit immediately drawing attention. And Nugget noticed him too, this quiet, serious young man whose eyes followed her with a mixture of caution and intrigue. Their first encounter was less a meeting and more a challenge. She was talking with a few of the women, trading laughs and jokes, when a newcomer, rough around the edges, tried to push his luck. Lovechild stepped in, a silent warning in his eyes, and the man backed down without a word. Nugget watched, her gaze lingering on him, sizing him up. She walked over to him after, her eyes glinting with a mix of admiration and amusement. "So, you're the one they talk about?" she asked, a smirk tugging at the corner of her lips. He looked at her, expression unreadable. Depends on who's talking. From that moment, they were bound by a shared understanding. Nugget had her own way of handling herself, but she found comfort in Lovechild's steady presence. And he, in turn, found something in her he hadn't realized he needed: a partner, a kindred spirit, someone who could challenge him as much as she could stand beside him. They began to spend their nights together, watching over the strip, sharing stories under the dim streetlights and the thick summer air. She would tell him about the beach, about the waves crashing on the shore, and the endless stretch of sand, painting a picture of a world he'd never seen. In turn, he'd share pieces of his own story, his mother's strength, and the quiet power he'd found in being the strip's silent guardian. With Nugget at his side, Lovechild felt more than just a protector. He felt seen. She wasn't intimidated by his reputation or his loyalty to the strip. She saw him for who he was, for the boy who grew up listening to secrets, who had become a man by learning to protect those who couldn't protect themselves. And for the first time, he felt like he had a down woman, someone who would stand by him through the highs and lows of Dawson's Strip. Together, they became an unbreakable force on Dawson. With Nugget's fearless spirit and Lovechild's quiet strength, they redefined what it meant to live and survive there. They were the guardians of the Strip, protectors of a world that was both brutal and beautiful, united by loyalty, love, and a shared understanding that even in the hardest places, there was still room for loyalty, for trust, and maybe even for a little bit of love. Nugget's arrival on Dawson's Strip was like a gust of fresh air laced with wildfire. Young, quick, and fierce, she had a reputation that reached every corner of the Strip within days. The older women recognized her as Lovechild's bottom woman, his right hand, the one who had his back and brought a new order to the streets. She was the one who kept him grounded, and her loyalty was clear. As soon as Nugget took her place, she began cleaning up Dawson's Strip, redefining the way things ran with the swift confidence of someone who knew the streets and respected their unspoken codes. One of her first orders of business was to curb the chaos that often spilled out in public. She declared that no one would drink in front of the corner stores or loiter aimlessly day or night. The once unruly Strip began to change, a sense of organization settling over it like a sudden calm. She gave clear instructions to the women, directing all business back to Lovechild's house. The house transformed into the central hub of Dawson's Strip, where business was done with a new sense of respect and discretion. Nugget wasn't just bringing order, she was bringing money. She turned such a profit for Lovechild that they started to expand. The abandoned shacks along the block, once eyesores, were now opportunities. She and Lovechild invested in 2 of them, renovating the interiors and outfitting them with new furniture, lighting, and a purpose. One shack became a juke joint where people could escape into the rhythm of blues and jazz, the music rolling through the night like a lifeline. Another became a dedicated liquor house, stocked with bottles, glasses, and a bar that Nugget herself tended when needed. And of course, there was the whore house, a safe place where the women could do their work without worry, clean beds and dim lighting, providing a veneer of safety and comfort. The backfield, once littered with trash and weeds, was now unrecognizable. Nugget saw potential in that patch of land, so she cleared it out, trimmed the overgrown bushes, and made it a place people actually wanted to be. She strung lights across the space, their warm glow casting a welcoming shimmer over the tables and chairs that were now scattered throughout. A makeshift bar was set up in one corner, lined with drinks for sale, while picnic tables provided places for the Strip's patrons to relax and socialize. But that wasn't all. Nugget made sure one of the girls was stationed at the grill, her skills rivaling those of any barbecue joint in town. The smell of grilled meat would waft across the strip, adding to the night's allure and drawing people in. Everything had a price, but nothing felt cheap. Nugget had brought a sense of pride to the strip, a touch of class to a place that had seen too many nights of chaos. She didn't just bring money, she brought order, dignity, and a renewed sense of purpose. Soon enough, the entire block was alive with a new energy. People would come from miles around, drawn to the strip not just for what was for sale, but for the experience, the atmosphere that Nugget had crafted with an expert's touch. The lights, the music, the food, and the drinks all painted a picture of Dawson's Strip as something more than just a rundown stretch of abandoned shacks and desperate lives. Nugget had turned it into a place of community, a place where people could forget their troubles for a little while and feel, if only for a night, like they belonged to something bigger. Lovechild and Nugget were the king and queen of Dawson's Strip, their names whispered with respect and a hint of envy. Together, they'd taken a broken-down block and built an empire, their influence reaching every corner, their presence felt by everyone. And as they walked the strip, surveying the life they'd breathed into it, they knew that they'd done more than just make money. They'd given Dawson's Strip a heartbeat, one that pulsed with the rhythm of loyalty, resilience, and a fierce, unbreakable love. Lovechild's name echoed through Wilmington like fireworks, each mention sparking curiosity and admiration, leaving a trail of intrigue behind. People talked about him not only on Dawson's Strip, but in every smoky juke joint, pool hall, and corner store. His rise was magnetic, the kind of story that didn't just draw people in, it pulled them into the legend. To most, he was untouchable, a man who had taken nothing and turned it into something bigger than anyone had thought possible. Dawson's Strip was now a hub, alive and bustling under his and Nugget's rule, their influence spreading beyond the limits of the block. He was the man everyone wanted to know, and the man everyone knew not to cross. Wilmington's law, such as it was, rarely intervened. The city's officers, from beat cops to higher-ups, were too busy enjoying Dawson's Strip themselves, frequenting the liquor house and the main house after hours, blending in with the night under the influence of Lovechild's empire. Arrests on Dawson's Strip were unheard of. No one dared to disrupt what had become a sort of unspoken harmony. The city's lawmen turned a blind eye to what was happening there, too caught up in the charm and indulgence of it all to do anything that would threaten their access. As long as everyone stayed in line, Dawson's Strip remained an untouchable corner of Wilmington, where law and order wore different colors. But not everyone was enchanted by Lovechild's rise. In a part of Wilmington known as Ugly Town, a place where desperation had settled in thick, where prospects were few and hope was rarer, jealousy simmered. Ugly Town had once been Wilmington's roughest and hardest place, but now Dawson's Strip had taken that title and added something else, a pulse. And that didn't sit well with the old guard of Ugly Town, the men who had built their own small worlds in the shadows, men who felt threatened by Lovechild's growing influence. One man in particular, known as Killjoy, hated the very sound of Lovechild's name. Killjoy had been something of a legend in Ugly Town before Lovechild's rise, an old hustler with a bitter heart, hardened by years on the streets and soured by missed opportunities. He had run his own part of the city with an iron grip, collecting dues from the vulnerable, ruling over his slice of town with intimidation and fear. He had thrived off the struggles of others, his reputation built on manipulation and control, but those days were slipping through his fingers, and he could feel his grip loosening. To Killjoy, Lovechild was everything he despised. Lovechild's rise was not only swift and audacious, but marked by a level of respect and loyalty that Killjoy could never command. Lovechild's success was rooted in loyalty, not fear, and that burned Killjoy like a brand. The men of Wilmington, young and old, now looked up to Lovechild, admiring his calm authority, his sense of honor, and the way he protected his people. It was an honor Killjoy had never tasted, and he despised Lovechild for it. Every time he heard someone mention Lovechild's name, it felt like salt in a wound, a constant reminder of the power he no longer had. So Killjoy seethed, his envy festering into something darker. The more people celebrated Lovechild, the more determined Killjoy became to put an end to it. He watched from Uglytown, keeping a close eye on Lovechild's operations, waiting for a weakness, a misstep, any crack in the empire he'd built. His vendetta wasn't just about business, it was personal. He couldn't stand the thought of Lovechild's name on everyone's lips, the thought of someone else being the man everyone turned to. To Killjoy, Lovechild was the epitome of everything he could never be. And so, Lovechild became the target, the name Killjoy held like a curse. He was determined to bring Lovechild down, to tarnish the reputation that had become Wilmington's latest legend. He bided his time, jealousy eating away at him, plotting in the shadows of Uglytown, where he nursed his hatred and waited for the moment to strike. For Killjoy, this was more than just rivalry, it was revenge, a twisted attempt to reclaim the respect and power he believed he deserved, even if it meant turning Dawson's Strip upside down. Killjoy knew he couldn't just waltz into Dawson's Strip and take down Lovechild himself. The Strip was too tightly woven into Lovechild's command and had Nugget's fierce, watchful eye overseeing every detail. So Killjoy devised a plan, one that would exploit the very power that kept Dawson's Strip alive its women. He knew just who to send, a woman from Uglytown with a reputation that matched her name, Shireen. She was one of Uglytown's finest, with a sly intelligence and a way of slipping into places unnoticed, blending in as if she belonged. Shireen was street-smart, slick as oil, and she knew how to work people. She moved with a calculated charm that made people feel at ease, even when she was getting exactly what she wanted out of them. She was tall and lean, with eyes that held secrets and a smile that promised both pleasure and peril. Killjoy sent her with one mission: get close to Lovechild's operation, learn its weak points, and if possible, bring it down from the inside. She slipped into Dawson's Strip late one evening, carrying herself like she'd been there 1,000 times. Her entry was smooth, seamless, as she chatted with the women, even laughing with some of the men who watched her with interest. She found her way into the juke joint, danced to the rhythm of the night, and soon enough was circulating around the liquor house. She was charming, smooth-talking her way into conversations, slipping in questions here and there as she worked to piece together the puzzle of Lovechild's empire. Her act was flawless, but she underestimated the sharp eye of one person, Nugget. Nugget had her ear to the ground, her instincts finely tuned to any disturbance on the Strip. It didn't take her long to notice the newcomer, how Shireen moved just a little too smoothly, how her eyes lingered a little too long when Lovechild's name came up in conversation. Nugget's instincts kicked in, suspicion settling in her gut as she watched Shireen work the crowd. Nugget had seen her share of hustlers and spies, and she wasn't one to let a snake slither past her unnoticed. That night, Nugget waited for the crowd to thin out. When the last of the patrons stumbled out and the Strip had fallen into its usual midnight quiet, she made her move. Catching Shireen as she slipped out of the liquor house, Nugget approached her with an easy stride, her expression unreadable. Shireen barely had time to react before Nugget's hand shot out, grabbing her by the arm and pulling her into the shadows behind one of the abandoned shacks. In one swift motion, Nugget pressed a blade to Shireen's throat, the steel cold and unyielding against her skin. Shireen's eyes widened, a flicker of fear breaking through her carefully composed mask. Nugget leaned in close, her voice low and lethal. "I know what you're doing here," she whispered, her gaze cutting through Shireen's facade. "You thought you could come here and poke around in our business? You've got one chance to tell me who sent you, or you'll be spilling more than secrets tonight." Shireen's calm shattered under the intensity of Nugget's stare, the pressure of the blade against her jugular sharp and real. She tried to wriggle free, but Nugget held her steady, unrelenting, her eyes blazing with the fierceness that had made her Dawson's queen. Shireen finally cracked, her voice barely a murmur as she confessed. "It's Killjoy," she whispered, her voice trembling. He sent me to get close to figure out how to take you all down. He's jealous of Lovechild, wants him out of the picture. Said he'd do whatever it took. Nugget's jaw clenched at the mention of Killjoy, the confirmation of her suspicions only fueling her anger. She pressed the blade just a little harder, enough to draw a thin line of blood, a reminder of who held the power here. You tell Killjoy that Dawson's Strip isn't his playground, Nugget hissed, her voice laced with venom. Tell him that if he so much as looks this way again, it won't be your neck he'll have to worry about. With that, she released Tureen, giving her a hard shove that sent her stumbling back. Corrine clutched her neck, her eyes wide with a mix of terror and respect, and without another word, she turned and bolted, disappearing into the shadows from which she'd come. Nugget watched her go, her fingers still wrapped around the handle of her knife, her heart beating with the thrill of protecting everything she and Lovechild had built. When Nugget returned to Lovechild, she told him everything, her voice steady, but her eyes filled with the fire that had kept Dawson's Strip safe. They knew now that Killjoy's jealousy had crossed a line. But instead of fear, Nugget and Lovechild felt something else resolve. Killjoy wanted a war? Then he would find out just how strong the heart of Dawson's Strip really was, because they would defend it against anyone who dared to challenge them. From that night on, the Strip remained vigilant. The women held their heads a little higher, the men stood a little taller, and together they braced themselves. They knew Killjoy wasn't done, but neither were they. And with Nugget by Lovechild's side, they would defend Dawson's Strip with every ounce of courage, loyalty, and strength they had. Killjoy waited in the dim light of an alley on the edge of Uglytown, arms crossed, impatience gnawing at him as he anticipated Tureen's return. When he finally saw her stumbling toward him, her usual smooth confidence shattered. He knew things hadn't gone according to plan. His face darkened as she approached, rubbing a faint red line on her neck, a faint reminder of Nugget's warning. Corrine, shaken but not defeated, caught her breath and launched into a recounting of her encounter with Nugget. She spoke of the street-smart girl who had gotten the best of her, sizing her up and exposing her intentions with frightening precision. Corrine had never heard of this Nugget before, which made her even more unsettling. This girl wasn't part of Wilmington's usual crowd. She was an outsider, yet she carried herself like she owned Dawson's Strip. Corrine confessed that Nugget had a certain edge, something that made her impossible to underestimate. As she continued, her words took on an unexpected softness. Corrine's eyes drifted, almost wistful, as she murmured about Lovechild. Despite the risk she'd taken, she couldn't help but be impressed by his operation, by the sense of loyalty and purpose that radiated from his people. She even admitted, in a moment of daring honesty, that she would have considered working for him if she hadn't been bound to Killjoy. The words had barely left her mouth when Killjoy's hand shot out, delivering a stinging slap across her face. The crack echoed off the walls of the alley as Tureen stumbled, clutching her cheek, shock and pain mingling in her gaze as she looked up at him. "Don't you ever let me hear you say his name again." Killjoy's voice was a snarl, his eyes blazing with a fury that sent a shiver down her spine. To him, her admiration was a betrayal, a confession that Lovechild had something he couldn't provide. That sting of jealousy, already simmering, now burned hotter as Killjoy seethed, the reminder of Lovechild's growing power fueling his anger. Lovechild had the loyalty of the women, a quality Killjoy could never understand nor replicate. Lovechild had turned Dawson's Strip into something more than a business. He'd built a community, a family of sorts, united by a shared respect and purpose. It was a power Killjoy couldn't grasp, and it ate away at him like a poison. But Killjoy had his own edge, the gangsters of Uglytown, men who followed him out of fear and allegiance to the old ways. They didn't care about loyalty or community. They wanted control, money, and power, the same things Killjoy valued. They were men who wouldn't hesitate to enforce Killjoy's will, men hardened by survival in the darkest corners of Wilmington, unbothered by questions of honor or respect. As he stood there, anger pulsing through him, Killjoy's mind began to race, plotting his next move. He'd had enough of this so-called king of Dawson's Strip, this man whose name had become a symbol of power he couldn't match. If Lovechild thought he could rule Wilmington without consequence, he was sorely mistaken. Killjoy's face twisted into a grim smile, his anger replaced by a steely resolve. He would take his army of gangsters and bring the war to Lovechild's doorstep. Dawson's Strip had played its last night in peace because Killjoy was determined to reclaim his place in the city, and he would stop at nothing to see it done. The city of Wilmington held its breath, caught in a tense lull, the air thick with anticipation. Word of the brewing conflict between Lovechild and Killjoy had spread like wildfire, each whisper fueling a public curiosity that felt almost voyeuristic. People watched Dawson's Strip as if it were the stage for an epic showdown, waiting for the first act to begin. Wilmington's usual sounds, boisterous laughter, juke joint melodies, the clinking of glasses, had all but faded. The city was unnaturally quiet, like it was bracing for something inevitable. With the business on Dawson's Strip grinding to a near halt, the hustle had slowed to a crawl. Yet Lovechild wasn't fazed. He welcomed the quiet, even as it brought back memories of simpler times when he'd run barefoot on these very streets, penniless and free. This break felt like a gift, a chance to breathe and remember what mattered. He had built a life that demanded his energy every day, but now, with the city's gaze turned toward him, he could let it all fall silent, if only for a little while. On an unusually warm afternoon, Lovechild lay back on a worn leather sofa in the main house, his shirt open, his smooth-toned chest rising and falling with each breath. His skin glowed with the confidence of a young man who had lived more than his 19 years. Nugget rested beside him, her head nestled on his stomach, her fingers tracing idle patterns across his skin. In this rare moment of peace, they were two young souls, not bound by the weight of their surroundings or the tension simmering in the streets outside. The world beyond seemed a distant dream as they lay together, the quiet settling over them like a blanket. The main house was more than just a hub for business. It was where Lovechild's mother had taken up residence, her presence a silent force that anchored him. She was a quiet, enigmatic figure, a woman who had seen more of life than she ever spoke of. Since Lovechild took over Dawson, she had retreated into the privacy of the house, going to bed each evening at 6 o'clock sharp, a ritual as unchanging as the sun setting. No one ever saw her except for Lovechild, her doors closed to everyone else, as if she were a ghost haunting the walls of the house. Some on the Strip wondered if she was even real. Rumors floated around that she had passed on, or that she'd left town altogether. But each evening, Lovechild would slip quietly into her room, and they would talk in low voices, sharing secrets only they knew. These meetings had a mystery of their own, drawing whispers from the women of Dawson's Strip, who watched from afar whenever Lovechild emerged from the back door of the main house. He would step out into the field, breathing in the cool air like it was a tonic, his silhouette framed against the twilight, strong and serene. In these moments, he looked as though he'd awakened from a long winter's sleep, his presence a reminder that he was very much still in control. The women watched him with a sense of reverence, feeling his calm as if it radiated outward. They knew his strength wasn't just physical, it was rooted in a wisdom that came from those private meetings with his mother, an understanding of life that seemed to ground him even in times of uncertainty. As they stood watching him from the shadows, they could see in his quiet gaze the resolve of someone who knew what lay ahead but was willing to wait, to let things unfold as they would. And though the Strip had slowed, the tension in the city continued to build. Wilmington was waiting, each day passing like the ticking of a clock counting down. But for now, Lovechild found comfort in the pause, in the peace of those rare, reflective days. He knew the storm was coming, but in this moment he could breathe, anchored by the memory of his youth and the quiet strength of his mother's presence. He was ready, whenever it came, for the fire that awaited him. As the weeks passed, the silence in Wilmington gave way to a return of familiar sounds. Dawson's Strip came back to life, its pulse steady as fresh energy filled the streets. The corner stores once again kept their lights on late, and the murmur of voices, laughter, and life returned. The invisible truce between Lovechild and Killjoy held firm, as if both men had mutually decided to draw back and let Dawson breathe. With business flourishing, the strip bustled with fresh faces, new clients bringing a wave of fresh money that flowed through the houses, the liquor spots, and juke joints. Though the street felt revived, Lovechild's focus shifted inward. Almost every evening he disappeared into the main house, a ritual he held sacred. His mother, the only true constant in his life, had grown frail over the years. She spent most of her days resting, her presence a quiet strength that anchored him even in her declining health. She was a woman who had seen the hardest parts of life up close, yet she had held on with a resilience that mirrored her son's. But now time was taking its toll. Years ago, she had confided in Lovechild about a venereal disease that had no cure. It was a painful secret that had left her with little choice but to pull back from the world and let her son carry on her dreams. Lovechild's heart ached every time he saw her weakened, knowing she had given so much of herself, her body, and her spirit to ensure he could have a life beyond the one she had known. She had become a legend of sorts on Dawson, the mysterious matron whose strength ran through every beat of the strip's heart, even if she remained hidden behind closed doors. Lovechild was determined to save her, and he clung to a story he'd once heard, a whisper from a passing traveler about a rumored cure hidden deep in Africa. The traveler had spun tales of healing plants, shamanic practices, and age-old remedies that could cure ailments no doctor in the States dared to treat. Lovechild was captivated by the idea, a hope that kept him anchored as he promised her that one day he'd save enough money to fly her there, to this land of hidden cures and ancient wisdom. He often spoke of this dream to her as they sat together, his voice low, filled with conviction. She would close her eyes, her hand resting over his, as if she could see it herself. The plains, the distant landscapes, the promise of a place where she could walk freely again, unburdened. Her illness weighed on him, a reminder that time was fragile and that his strength alone couldn't heal all wounds. Still, he poured his energy into Dawson's Strip, his ambitions taking root in the community he'd built and the people he'd pulled together. For every dollar earned, every corner claimed, he was a step closer to fulfilling his promise. To the rest of the city, Lovechild was a ruler, a figure who commanded respect. But to his mother, he was just her boy, carrying the last flickers of her dream, bound by a love that ran deeper than blood. And though Dawson was alive and buzzing once more, each evening Lovechild would slip back to the main house, sitting beside her, whispering their secret plan, their shared hope. It was a bond that sustained him, the quiet courage that softened his heart even as he steeled himself to face the world outside. The night had started like any other, with Dawson's Strip buzzing with life. Music floated from the juke joint, the rhythmic pulse drawing patrons from all over, and the hum of laughter and chatter filled the warm air. The houses were making money hand over fist, and Lovechild felt at ease, savoring the success of what he'd built. Yet, beneath the noise and light, something felt wrong, a prickling in the back of his mind that set him on edge. Nugget had sensed it too without a word. She'd risen from her seat, casting him a look that said she'd be back soon, just needed to check on the girls. But as the minutes dragged on and Nugget didn't return, a chill crept over Lovechild. Then, like a knife slicing through the night, he heard it. A scream so piercing, so raw, it stopped his heart. It was Nugget. Lovechild sprang to his feet, and his mother, sensing the danger that lingered in the air, grabbed the shotgun from beneath her bed. She didn't move from her place by the window, but stood ready, her sharp eyes scanning the yard. As he bolted out the door, he was met by chaos. One of the houses was ablaze, flames clawing up the walls and spilling from broken windows. The fire cast an eerie glow over the field, making shadows dance in the thick smoke. The roar of engines tore through the night, and from the darkness came a line of automobiles barreling down the dirt road, men shouting as they leaned out of their windows, their guns raised. In a terrifying unison, they fired, spraying bullets into the crowd as bottles of cocktail bombs flew, shattering against walls and exploding into orange fury. The first house collapsed under the flames, and Lovechild could only watch as his life's work went up in smoke. The men from Uglytown had come, swarming the strip like a horde. They spilled out of the cars and flooded the field behind the houses, pouring in from every side. The women were fighting them back fiercely, wielding knives, bats, whatever they could get their hands on. They struck with the strength of those who had everything to lose, determined to protect their turf, their lives. But the men from Uglytown were ruthless, fueled by violence and bloodlust, overpowering many of the girls who stood in their way. Lovechild fought his way through the chaos, dodging bullets and flames, his mind racing as he searched for Nugget. He caught a glimpse of her near one of the burning houses, her silhouette half hidden in smoke. Relief washed over him for a moment until he saw her collapse to the ground, her body slumping as she struggled to lift herself up. He reached her side and fell to his knees, cradling her in his arms. Blood smeared across his hands as he held her face, the familiar features almost unrecognizable, battered and broken. Her face was slashed, a jagged line cutting through her cheek, and blood ran freely from cuts on her head and mouth. Her eyes fluttered open, their warmth fading as she struggled to focus on him. Nugget, his voice broke, his heart shattering as he held her close. Her hand reached up, weakly brushing his cheek, her fingers leaving a smear of blood. "They came from everywhere," she whispered, her words barely audible. "Killjoy, he sent them, didn't want you to see tomorrow." A shot rang out in the distance, a reminder of the chaos still raging around them. Lovechild clenched his jaw, his mind torn between rage and grief. He could hear his mother's voice, shouting from the house, her shotgun held steady as she fired at any man who came near the main house. Lovechild held Nugget tighter, his promise of protection ringing hollow in his ears. Her strength had always been unbreakable, but now, looking at her, his heart splintered at the sight of her broken and bloodied in his arms. She had fought for him, for Dawson's Strip, for everything they had built together, and now she lay dying. The fire spread rapidly, and the air grew thick with smoke. In that moment, surrounded by flames, with the cries of his people echoing around him, Lovechild knew that he was outnumbered, outgunned, yet he had no intention of letting Killjoy win. He'd lost too much already, but he would fight until there was nothing left, until every last man from Uglytown had been driven out or burned with the very fires they'd started. As he lifted Nugget's limp form, his face set with a resolve as fierce as the flames that licked the sky. He would carry her to safety, but he'd be back for his revenge. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. Lovechild's heart pounded as he reached the house. His mother's body slumped by the doorway, her hands still clutching the shotgun, defiant even in death. A cluster of bloodstains darkened her chest, and he knew she had given everything to protect him, to protect their home. Holding Nugget's limp body against him, the weight of loss crushed him, pressing down like the smoke-filled night that clung heavy around them. He had only seconds to make a decision, to act before the fire consumed everything they'd built. But then he heard it, the rhythmic, ominous beat of hooves on the gravel road, a sound that froze him to his core. The crackling fire and chaos fell away, leaving only that relentless drumming echoing closer and closer. Lovechild looked up, and there he was, Killjoy, astride a massive black stallion, his silhouette stark against the blaze. His men swarmed around him, armed and sneering, their eyes cold as they surrounded the main house. Killjoy's voice rang out, deep and taunting, piercing the midnight silence as he raised his long gun in a dark proclamation. "Little boy," he sneered, his grin stretching wide beneath his black leather hat. "This is my city, and there's only one pimp in Wilmington, Killjoy." His voice dripped with triumph, his menacing words cutting deep. Lovechild stood frozen, clinging to Nugget and staring at the man who had destroyed everything he loved. Killjoy sat tall on his stallion, dressed head to toe in black leather, his suit shimmering in the firelight like the glint of a polished weapon. With his long coat flaring out, his wide-brimmed hat casting a shadow over his eyes and his gun held high. He looked every inch the dark overlord he claimed to be. Lovechild felt a flash of fury burn through his grief, a wave so powerful it almost overtook him. He gently laid Nugget on the ground, his fingers lingering on her hand, before he stood up, his face set with a grim determination. They wanted him out on the strip, beaten and defeated, but he would not give Killjoy the satisfaction. With his head held high, Lovechild stepped into the open, his mother's fallen shotgun in hand. The firelight flickered across his face, casting harsh shadows that carved out the raw pain and rage written in his expression. Killjoy laughed, a mocking, guttural sound that made Lovechild's jaw tighten. "What's wrong, boy?" Killjoy called out, tilting his hat back to reveal his cold eyes gleaming with malice. "Can't handle the big leagues. You were always just a little pawn in my city." Lovechild's voice was low but unwavering, laced with a venom that cut through the air like steel. "You might have taken this place, Killjoy, but I swear on the blood spilled tonight, you'll never own it." The men around Killjoy tensed, sensing the tension, but Killjoy merely smirked, relishing the challenge. He aimed his gun squarely at Lovechild, his finger teasing the trigger. "I'll give you one last chance, boy. Drop the gun and bow, or I'll put you down myself." But Lovechild didn't flinch, his hand steady on the shotgun. This was his home, his blood, his people, and he'd defend it with every breath he had left. And even if this was his last stand, he knew he would go down fighting, for his mother, for Nugget, and for the life he'd built from the ashes. The fires burned around him, and though the odds were against him, he stood tall, unbroken. The showdown had begun, and there was no turning back. As the police sirens grew louder, bouncing off the burning buildings and casting blue and red shadows across the strip, Killjoy wasted no time. He struck the reins of his black stallion and disappeared into the darkness, his men scattering into the night like phantoms, their escape routes planned and practiced. Dawson fell silent once more, the haunting quiet mingling with the distant wail of approaching police cars, leaving behind only smoke, rubble, and the bitter scent of destruction. Lovechild didn't hesitate. With Nugget's injuries weighing on his mind and his losses heavy on his heart, he slipped back into the main house and quickly made his way to a hidden doorway beneath a dusty rug. He pushed it aside, revealing a heavy trapdoor that led down into a secret tunnel, a labyrinthine passage that wound beneath Dawson and extended to another world entirely, a sanctuary built from years of careful planning and survival. The tunnel opened into a basement beneath a tidy, two-story house in a quiet, middle-class neighborhood just blocks away. No one would suspect that this house belonged to Lovechild. The Cadillac DeVille, parked out front, gleamed under the dim streetlight, just another family car in the neighborhood. For Lovechild and his mother, it had been a secret refuge, a place where they could play the roles of ordinary people, blending seamlessly with their neighbors while enjoying the spoils of their hidden lives. They would slip away through the labyrinth on nights when the weight of Dawson grew too heavy, vanishing for a few days to enjoy meals in peace, relax, and rest in the luxury of anonymity. The women on Dawson had assumed he was out of town whenever he disappeared, never guessing that he was just a stone's throw away, living in quiet comfort. Lovechild emerged from the tunnel's end and stepped into a closet in the house's back bedroom. He closed the door quietly behind him, securing the hidden lock before making his way into the main living area. A stillness hung in the air, comforting yet heavy, as he entered the bathroom and stood before the mirror. His face was smeared with soot and blood, his eyes tired but unyielding. He studied himself for a moment, then turned on the tap, scrubbing his face, arms, and chest, washing away the remnants of the night. As the warm water ran over his scars, he felt a strange relief, a flicker of freedom amidst the chaos. After he dried off, he dressed in fresh clothes and opened a hidden safe built into the closet wall. Inside was the fortune he had accumulated, stacks of cash bound tightly, glistening jewelry, and a few priceless heirlooms saved for moments just like this. He grabbed as much money as he could, filling duffel bags with bills and a handful of valuables. The rest of the night's horrors would have to wait. He had to get out of the city and disappear before the police closed in or Killjoy's men found him again. He loaded the bags into the Cadillac's trunk, pausing to take one last look at the quiet house he'd once called his sanctuary. In it were memories of peace, fleeting as they were, and traces of the life he might have lived. But now there was no looking back. The Strip was gone, his mother lost, and Dawson's dreams left smoldering in the night. Sliding into the driver's seat, he started the engine, the familiar rumble of the Cadillac, both a comfort and a final farewell. He took a steadying breath, gripping the wheel tightly, then headed south. The city lights of Wilmington faded in his rearview mirror, and as dawn began to break on the horizon, he set his sights on Myrtle Beach. To be continued.